The pyrotechnics team had already started the 30-second countdown when someone spotted the 8-year-old extra wandering directly toward the rigged storefront that was about to explode. Listen carefully, because the choice John Wayne makes in the next 15 seconds and the price he pays for making it will haunt everyone on that set for the rest of their lives. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? It was supposed to be a simple day of background filming. The main action had been completed the week before, and now the production was picking up texture shots, explosions, gunfire, chaos in the streets that would be cut together with the principal photography. The kind of work that didn't require the stars to be present. The pyrotechnics supervisor was Gerald Hammond, known as Steady Jerry for his meticulous approach. 20 years in the business, without a serious accident. His team had spent 3 days wiring the general store. Everything had been checked and certified safe. But John Wayne was there anyway. He had a policy of showing up on days when dangerous work was being done, believing that the star of a picture should share the risks that everyone else was taking. The western town set stretched across 3 acres of New Mexico desert, a collection of false-fronted buildings that looked authentic from the camera's angle, but were hollow shells. The general store, the saloon, the bank, all had been rigged with charges that would blow out windows, collapse walls, and send debris flying in spectacular patterns. Look at the setup, and you'll understand how the mistake happened. The extras, townspeople fleeing the chaos, were supposed to be at the far end of the street, running away from the camera. They had been rehearsed and positioned by the assistant director, Tommy Kendrick. The problem was the extras. There were 47 extras that day, including 6 children, ranging from 7 to 12. One of those children was Michael Torres, 8 years old, the son of a local rancher who had signed him up as a birthday present. Notice how easy it is for this to happen on a film set. Dozens of people moving in different directions, each focused on their own task. In all that controlled chaos, one small boy slipping away from the group was invisible. What nobody had noticed was that Michael had wandered away from the group. Michael had spotted something interesting. A prop rifle leaning against the general store's porch. To an 8-year-old boy obsessed with cowboys, it was irresistible. He walked toward it, eyes fixed on the wooden stock. The countdown had started. 30 seconds. The camera was rolling, capturing the wide shot of the empty street before the chaos would fill it. The extras were in position at the far end, waiting for their cue to run. The pyrotechnics team was ready at the control board, fingers hovering over the switches that would send electrical current racing through 200 yards of cable to the charges embedded in the general store's walls. He had no idea he was walking into a kill zone. 25 seconds. And then he saw the boy. Gerald Hammond was scanning the set through binoculars, a final safety check before detonation. His eyes swept from left to right, confirming that the street was clear, that no one had wandered into the danger zone. Wait, because this is where the story splits into 2 timelines. What happened and what could have happened if one man hadn't been watching. Hold! Hold! Hammond screamed into his radio. There's a child in the zone. But the radio crackled with static. The technician at the control board heard only fragments. The countdown continued. 20 seconds. John Wayne was standing near the camera position, watching the setup through his own binoculars. He had seen the same thing Hammond had seen. A small figure in brown pants and a white shirt, walking directly toward the general store's porch. Wayne didn't think. His body was already moving, legs driving him forward in a desperate sprint. The distance from the camera position to the general store was about 150 yards. Wayne was 57 years old, with a body battered by decades of stunt work. He didn't have time. He had maybe 15 seconds if he was lucky. 15 seconds. Stop for a second, and picture this from above. The western town street stretches out like a dusty corridor between 2 rows of false buildings. At the far end, 47 extras are clustered together, unaware of the drama unfolding. At the near end, a film crew is frozen behind their camera, some of them just now realizing that something is wrong. In the middle, two figures are moving, a small boy walking slowly toward a porch, and a large man in a cowboy hat running as fast as his legs will carry him. 10 seconds. Gerald Hammond had abandoned his radio, and was running too. But he was farther away, and older, and slower. He could see Wayne ahead of him, covering ground, with a determination that bordered on desperate. "Stop the countdown!" Hammond screamed at anyone who could hear. "For God's sake, stop it!" But the technician at the control board couldn't hear him. The countdown was automated now, triggered by a timing system that would detonate the charges at 0, whether anyone wanted it to or not. The only way to stop it was to physically disconnect the cables, and the control board was too far away. Michael Torres reached the porch of the general store. He bent down to pick up the prop rifle, his small hands closing around the wooden stock. It was heavier than he expected. Not a toy after all, but a real rifle modified for blank firing. He tried to lift it, but it was awkward, and he had to shift his grip. 8 seconds. Wayne was close now, close enough to see the wires running along the base of the porch, close enough to see the small boxes of explosives tucked into the corners of the doorframe, close enough to see Michael looking up at the sound of running footsteps, his face shifting from curiosity to confusion, to the first flicker of fear. He was maybe 6 feet from the nearest charge. 5 seconds. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. Wayne didn't slow down. He couldn't afford to slow down. His arms reached out as he ran, fingers stretching toward the boy. Every muscle in his body straining forward with a single desperate purpose. They hit the ground hard, Wayne taking the impact on his shoulder and side, rolling to put as much distance as possible between them and the building. Michael was screaming now, terrified and confused, not understanding what was happening or why this stranger had grabbed him. 2 seconds. He hit Michael at full speed, wrapping his arms around the small body and twisting in midair, turning so that his own back would face the explosion instead of the child. The momentum carried them both off the porch and into the street, Wayne's body curling around Michael's like a shell, protecting something precious inside. 0. 1 second. Wayne pulled Michael's head against his chest and covered the boy's ears with his hands, his own body hunched over the child like a human shield. The general store exploded. The shockwave hit Wayne's back like a giant fist, driving the air from his lungs and sending a spray of splinters and glass shards into his coat. The sound was beyond loud. It was a physical force that made his bones vibrate and his vision blur. Heat washed over him, not enough to burn but enough to feel like he'd stepped too close to an open furnace. Remember what I said about controlled explosions? The charges in that building had been placed to create a spectacular visual effect. Walls blowing outward, windows shattering, debris flying in all directions. From the camera's perspective, 200 yards away, it would look magnificent. From 6 feet away, it was something else entirely. "Are you hurt?" Wayne's voice sounded strange to his own ears, muffled and distant. "Michael, are you hurt?" And then, it was over. The explosion spent itself in a single catastrophic second, leaving behind smoke and dust and the creak of settling debris. Wayne didn't move. His ears were ringing so badly that he couldn't hear anything else, and his back felt like someone had hit him with a baseball bat. But his arms were still wrapped around Michael, and he could feel the boy's heart pounding against his chest. Wayne loosened his hold and looked down at the boy. Michael's face was streaked with tears and dust, but there was no blood that Wayne could see. His arms and legs seemed to be moving normally. The boy was crying, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body, but he was moving, squirming in Wayne's grip, and that was a very good sign. Children who were seriously injured usually went still. "I want my mom," Michael sobbed quietly. "I want my mom." Notice what's happening in the background while Wayne is checking on Michael. The set has erupted into chaos. People are running toward them from every direction. The pyrotechnics team, the medics who had been on standby, the extras who had finally realized that something terrible had almost happened. Gerald Hammond is sprinting up the street, his face white as paper, already calculating how close he had come to detonating a bomb with a child standing in the blast radius. And somewhere in the crowd, Tommy Kendrick, the assistant director who had been responsible for keeping track of the extras, is standing frozen, the full weight of his failure settling onto his shoulders. "I know, son. I know." Wayne's voice was gentle, despite the pain radiating through his back. "We're going to find her. But first, I need you to tell me if anything hurts." Wayne struggled to his feet, keeping one hand on Michael's shoulder to steady the boy. His back screamed in protest, and he could feel something wet running down between his shoulder blades. Blood, probably, from the debris that had peppered him. He ignored it. "Get this boy to the medics," Wayne said to the first person who reached them, a grip named Rodriguez, who looked like he was about to cry. "And find his parents. They need to know he's okay." "Mr. Wayne, you're hurt. Listen. Because what happens in the next hour will determine whether this becomes a story about a hero or a story about accountability. I said get the boy to the medics." Wayne's voice carried the authority of a man who was used to being obeyed. "I'll be fine." The medics found 13 splinters of varying sizes embedded in Wayne's back, along with several small cuts from flying glass. None of the injuries were serious, but the largest splinter had come within an inch of his spine. If he had been standing up instead of curled over Michael, it might have paralyzed him. But Wayne wasn't interested in discussing his injuries or his heroism. He was interested in something else. Michael was luckier. He had a bruised shoulder from the impact when Wayne tackled him, and his ears would ring for the rest of the day, but otherwise he was unharmed. The doctors called it a miracle. Wayne called it geometry. The angle of his body had shielded the boy from almost everything the explosion had thrown. "How did this happen?" he asked Gerald Hammond, who was standing beside his medical cot, looking like a man who had just watched his entire career flash before his eyes. "How did a child end up in the kill zone while we were counting down to detonation?" I think Hammond stopped, swallowed hard. "I think he wandered off after the final check. The countdown takes 30 seconds. That's enough time for a kid to walk 100 yards if nobody's watching." Hammond shook his head. "I don't know. I'm running through it, in my head, and I can't figure it out. We had the perimeter marked. We had spotters. We had a final visual check before the countdown started. Then how? And nobody was watching." It wasn't a question. Wayne's voice was flat, controlled, but there was something dangerous underneath it. The extras coordinator was dealing with a costume issue. The AD was working with the camera crew. I was at the detonation position. Hammond's voice cracked. "We all assumed someone else was watching the extras. Before we go any further, you need to understand something about the way film sets operated in 1964. Safety protocols existed, but they were often treated as suggestions rather than requirements. Productions were under constant pressure to stay on schedule and under budget, and that pressure created an environment where shortcuts became normal. A final safety check? Sure, but make it quick, we're losing light. A dedicated spotter for each danger zone. That's an extra salary we can't afford. Clear communication protocols? We've been doing this for years. We know what we're doing." This was the culture Wayne had been working in for 3 decades. He had seen the close calls, the minor injuries, the moments when luck was the only thing standing between a crew and tragedy. And he had, like everyone else, accepted it as the cost of making movies. Assumed. Wayne let the word hang in the air. You assumed. And that assumption almost killed an 8-year-old boy. Not anymore. I want a meeting, Wayne said, pushing himself up from the cot, despite the medic's protests. Tonight, everyone involved in this production, the director, the producers, the department heads, everyone. John, you need to rest. Wait, because this is where the story turns from a close call into a reckoning. I need to make sure this never happens again. Wayne's eyes were hard as flint. And if the production doesn't want to cooperate, I need to figure out what I'm going to tell Michael Torres's parents about why their son almost died today. The meeting happened 3 hours later in the production office, a trailer that had been converted into a temporary headquarters for the shoot. The director was there, a veteran named Samuel Hutchins, who had made a dozen westerns and thought he had seen everything. The line producer, the unit production manager, the heads of every department, and John Wayne, his back bandaged and his patience exhausted. John, if we tell them the full story, they might sue. Let me tell you what's going to happen, Wayne said without preamble. He was standing at the head of the table, refusing to sit, despite the obvious pain in his movements. First, the Torres family is going to be informed about exactly what happened today, not a sanitized version, not a story that makes us look better. The truth. They should sue. Wayne cut off the line producer without ceremony. Their son almost died because we failed to do our jobs. They have every right to hold us accountable. But the liability. Second, Wayne continued, as if the producer hadn't spoken. The boy is going to receive the best medical care available on our dime for as long as he needs it. If there are any long-term effects from what happened today, hearing loss, psychological trauma, anything, we're responsible for treating it. We have insurance for that. Third, and this is the one that's going to cost you real money. Wayne's voice dropped, becoming quiet in a way that commanded more attention than shouting. We're going to implement new safety protocols on this production. Real protocols, not suggestions. A dedicated safety officer with the authority to halt any shot at any time. Clear chains of communication. Designated supervisors for every group of extras, especially children. Expanded kill zones for pyrotechnics. And radio checks before every countdown. The room was silent. The producers were calculating costs. The department heads were imagining the delays. Everyone was thinking about the schedule that was already tight, and the budget that was already stretched. Samuel Hutchins spoke first. John, what you're asking for, it would add days to our schedule, maybe weeks. The studio isn't going to approve. Notice how the energy in the room shifts. This isn't a negotiation anymore. Wayne is telling them what's going to happen, and the only choice they have is whether to cooperate or be steamrolled. Then I'll talk to the studio myself. Wayne's eyes met the director's. I'll tell them that their biggest star was almost responsible for the death of a child because their production cut corners on safety. I'll tell them about every shortcut I've witnessed over the past 30 years, every close call that nobody reported, every time we got lucky instead of getting it right. He paused. And then I'll tell the press. The alternative, Wayne continued, is that we do this the right way. We take the time to implement real safety measures. We accept that movies aren't worth dying for or killing for. And when this production wraps, we make sure that what happened today becomes the last time something like this happens on any set I'm involved with. The meeting went on for another 2 hours, but the outcome was decided in that first exchange. The protocols Wayne demanded were implemented within 3 days. A safety officer was hired. A former stunt coordinator named Maria Santos, who had spent years advocating for better practices. Clear communication systems were established, and for the first time on a major Western production, child extras were assigned dedicated supervisors who had no other responsibilities during dangerous scenes. Remember the loops we opened earlier? Here's where they start to close. Michael Torres recovered fully from his bruises and his fright. His parents, far from suing the production, were grateful, not for the accident, but for the way it was handled afterward. Wayne personally met with them 2 days after the incident, explaining what had happened and what was being done to prevent it from happening again. "I can't undo what almost happened," Wayne told them, sitting in their modest living room with his hat in his hands. "I can't give your son back, the sense of safety he had before some adults failed him, but I can promise you that we're going to do better. Not just on this production, but everywhere I have any influence." "It was everyone's fault," Wayne said. "That's the whole point. We all let it happen, me included. I was there and I didn't notice he was missing until it was almost too late. That's something I'll carry with me." The father, a quiet man named Roberto Torres, studied Wayne for a long moment. "You saved my son's life," he said finally. "You ran into an explosion to protect a boy you'd never met, and now you're here apologizing to us for something that wasn't your fault." The mother, Elena Torres, reached out and took Wayne's bandaged hand. "What you're doing now, making sure it doesn't happen to another child, that's worth more than any apology. That's real." Wayne stayed for an hour, talking with the family about Michael's recovery, about the movie business, about the strange intersection of glamour and danger that defined life on a film set. When he left, Michael walked him to the door. "Mr. Wayne?" The boy's voice was small but steady.